her true story from North Carolina. My daughter-in-law screamed, "Get out, or I'll call the cops." After I babysat for 6 months, so I took back the car I gifted them. She wanted space. I cleared the garage. The plate slammed onto the table harder than any insult could. I looked up from my seat to see my daughter-in-law standing over me, fork clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her chest heaved, her face flushed, and her voice shook the windows of that warm kitchen. "You do not get to discipline my child. You are just a babysitter, nothing more," she screamed, pointing right at me as though I were a trespasser in her home. Her words hit me like a train, but I remained seated. I had spent the last 6 months cooking 3 meals a day, cleaning spilled juice, wiping noses, washing clothes, driving to kindergarten and soccer practices. Yet in that moment, it all collapsed into a single phrase: just a babysitter. I rose from my seat slowly, the chairs scraping softly against the wooden floor. My hands trembled slightly, but only from age, not from fear. Behind her, my son sat frozen, his eyes wide in shock. Across from me, my granddaughter looked up from her macaroni, confused, as though the world had tilted on its axis. The table, which had been set for a family dinner, felt like a battlefield now, but I said nothing. Inside, a quiet voice settled. If I was only the babysitter, then she was only the renter of the car I had given them. The room felt frozen. No one dared to speak, not my son. Not a word from my daughter-in-law's mouth beyond her verbal assault. No plates clattered, no forks dropped, just the stark tension between a gift and entitlement. I turned slightly, collecting my plate not with my hands, but with every ounce of dignity I still had left. I moved as if gravity itself did not want me there. The house was not mine. But the pain was. In the corner of the kitchen, the Toyota Camry I had bought for them gleamed through the window. I remembered the day I handed them the keys, explained it was just to help ease their burdens, that family helps family. Back then, they had hugged me like I was the strongest person alive. Now, she had erased all of that worth in a single sentence. I walked to the sink and set the plate down carefully. The water ran over my hands, washing away crumbs but not the sting. She claimed I had no right to correct her child, to offer suggestions, to pretend I had any authority. For months, I thought I was offering love. Apparently, to her, love was conditional. Do this, but no more. I dried my hands and stepped back. Around us, someone, anyone, might have offered a word, a gesture, a moment of solidarity. But the silence was too complete. As I glanced back at the table, I saw my granddaughter's eyes shimmer with tears. I wanted to say something to her, but I also understood that some lessons are better learned quietly. "Enough," I said softly, so only they could hear. "I will clean." I gathered the dishes one by one. I did not say, "Yes, you're right." I did not argue. I just removed every plate, every cup, every stray fork. I did not look at any of them. I did not meet my son's eyes as he watched the betrayal of his own mother. When the countertops were bare, I placed the last dish in the dishwasher and closed the door. The hum began, filling the silence with a mechanical righteousness. I cleaned until the sink was empty and the house was still. Then, without another word, I walked out of the kitchen. I went to the foyer and collected my purse. I placed one hand on the driver's seat of the Camry through the window. The leather smelled like summer mornings, like safety and home. I looked behind me one last time. My son's face was unreadable, and my daughter-in-law's expression was cold. Relief, pride, anger, I could not say. I whispered to the silent house, "Tomorrow is going to be very different." Then I walked out the front door and into the night. In my heart, the words repeated, "If I am just a babysitter, then she is just a temporary user of every gift I gave." I did not know how I would reclaim what was mine. I only knew that silence can be the start of our strongest declaration. She had called me nothing. Tomorrow I would remind her who I truly was. It began the day my daughter-in-law first sent me a text that read, "Can you start on Monday? We really need your help." And so I did, just like I had done for my own children all those years ago. I arrived early every morning to that cozy North Carolina home, cup of coffee in hand, ready for the 6-month stretch ahead. I cooked breakfast, even the toast that always landed crust first on the floor, and made lunches for my granddaughter, sturdy sandwiches with her name written in crayon on the bag. I scrubbed jars at night until they gleamed, folded tiny socks into paired piles, washed milk-stained onesies at 3 a.m., and ironed little blouses for preschool. On the weekends, I helped with homework and told stories about the day I met her mother. I brought his lunch to his office once when he forgot it. I was there for scraped knees and science projects, temper tantrums and triumphs. Some mornings, I was bleary-eyed, tired, my joints aching, but I got up anyway. I woke before dawn, walked through the silent house, brewed tea, carefully set the table with her fork and spoon in the right places, and waited for them all to wake up. I made sure the driveway was cleared of leaves so they could leave without slipping. Behind each chore was love, or so I believed. On their first anniversary since moving back, I decided to do something special. I saved every penny from my small teacher's pension and modest savings. I managed to pick up a reliable 2010 Toyota Camry, low mileage, in the perfect shade of silver. I had it detailed, added a GPS mount, and put in a full tank of gas. The night I handed them the keys, they hugged me with tears glistening. "Mom," my son said, voice thick, "we don't know how we'll manage all of this." "Thank you." "It's not much," I said, patting the hood fondly. "Just a little help," and for once, we all felt like a team again. The first month after the gift was pure sunshine. The baby smiled brighter, the couple's smiles were more real. I helped carry groceries from the car. They struggled with diaper bags on shoulder and keys in hand. We shared dinners at the table, chicken casserole I'd baked, pasta that filled hungry mouths. We laughed at cartoons, attended parent-teacher meetings together, my voice soft and proud as I introduced myself. "I'm Grandma, but I'm also here to help." I reminded the teacher how I used to teach classes, how I could volunteer. I sat through science fairs, glue stick in hand, drawing solar systems on poster boards. My granddaughter clenched my finger, calling me Super Grandma. She meant it too. When she climbed into my arms, I would lift her high, and she'd declare to the world, "My grandma is a superhero." Behind that title was every effort, every early morning and late night. I was the one who made sure there was a warm blanket for naps, a glass of water for midnight thirst, a comforting back pat during nightmares. I sat with her when the shots hurt, held her hand through fever, stayed awake because the dreams. At bedtime, we sat under a blanket fort, reading stories, whispering about dreams. She never wanted me to leave her room, always holding my finger until she forgave me for leaving her bed, and I never wanted to let go. For my son and daughter-in-law, I drove the Camry to preschool drop-offs. I picked them up again. I hosted playdates with their friends so the parents could have weekends to themselves. I kept the car clean and filled the tank. At birthday parties or playdates, they never once seemed to worry about gas money. Looking back, I know where it started to change. It was subtle. The first time my daughter-in-law said, "Mom, you don't have to come in on weekends," or when she suggested I could leave the holiday morning to spend with my friends. And I was honored but a little puzzled. I was just trying to belong, to help. Because that car, it wasn't just for them, it got me around too. To the library, to the grocery, to the bingo night with my grandchildren's friends. I liked driving to town for lunch and seeing the familiar faces wave, telling me how they spotted the little Camry at soccer practice. Yet after 2 months, the tone shifted. My packing suddenly seemed excessive. "You brought too much stuff," I heard when I arrived. Once, I walked into the living room carrying a stack of laundry to fold and was told to go upstairs because they needed quiet space. They began calling me helpful, but in a tone that didn't belong. On a Tuesday, I saved leftover macaroni from the dinner and reheated it for lunch. My daughter-in-law gave me a look. "Why are you eating that?" she asked, as though I shouldn't eat at all. They put real effort into cooking tonight. It wasn't the dish, it was the implication that I wasn't part of the family effort, that I existed in the margin. Not long after that, I drove to a school event alone. I forgot to sign the permission slip on time, not because I didn't care, but because I was busy helping everyone do their job. They called me after, sounding annoyed. "Grandma, could you remember a deadline?" They did not sound thankful. They sounded burdened. Still, I woke up the next day, took the same route, cleaned the same dishes, folded the same laundry, made the car shine on the driveway. And I did not complain, because I believed that family is worth giving, more, giving, until it hurts, until the gift is reinterpreted as rent, or burden, or intrusion. When I look back on those early weeks, I see the The way their faces lit up when I handed over the keys, the way my granddaughter's laugh echoed in the halls, the soft gratitude in their eyes, even if it faded eventually, was enough to keep me going. I remind myself that for 30 years I built this family, through blood and choice. 6 months of babysitting, it seemed a small exchange. But apparently, it wasn't enough to buy respect. Not today, not anymore. And today, I will move beyond hoping. I will act, not for revenge, but for recognition, because love deserves dignity, and gifts deserve boundaries. Tomorrow, I begin taking them back. It started with a comment. I parked the old Camry in the driveway and walked in with groceries in my arms. My daughter-in-law was on the phone, pacing the living room. She ended the call before I could even say hello. "I swear this car is making that rattling noise again," she muttered, not looking at me. "I don't think it's safe for the kid." I looked at the Camry through the window. It was showing more wear than before, honking occasionally, the A/C sputtering in the summer heat. But I had just filled the tank and had no issues driving it to pick up my granddaughter that morning. "I'll take it in for a check," I offered gently. "Maybe it's just the exhaust." But she waved me off without meeting my eyes. "No need, Grandma, I'll handle it." Her tone felt distant. I carried the groceries in and apologized for not noticing the sound earlier. She offered a curt nod and walked away. That evening, as I washed dishes, I heard her complaining quietly to my son about old tech stuff. "The app that controls the garage door? Why doesn't she want the newer system?" she moaned. "And she still can't set up the GPS. It's like she's living in the dark ages." I froze with suds in my hands. I remembered when I taught myself GPS to drive us to the hospital during the baby's first scare. I remembered when I helped her set up the Bluetooth in that same car. But suddenly my contributions were invisible. I said nothing, because once you've been thanked, it's hard to hear yourself disappear. The days passed. I continued my routine. I cooked meals early, packed lunches, ironed clothes for preschool, drove to doctor's appointments. I dusted shelves, washed windows, wiped every footprint off the floor by night's end. But I lost my place at the table. At dinner one evening, my granddaughter plopped a dinner plate in front of me. I was about to sit when my daughter-in-law cleared a spot in the living room instead. "I thought you'd like a quiet space," she said. "The baby's been sleeping oddly." It meant nothing, yet it felt like everything. The family zone was retreating. The space they once shared with me was narrowed, no reason, just assumption. I continued to fill in wherever needed. One afternoon, I opened the garage to grab a mower. Their SUV was parked for a wash, and I stopped to move it so I could access the tools. My daughter-in-law was inspecting seedlings in their planter boxes. She turned and said flatly, "You don't have to help in the garage, Grandma." "I just thought," I began, but she cut me off. "I know you mean well," she said, eyes filling with something like pity, "but that's just not your space." And I realized at that moment I had been standing on the edge of belonging, taken for granted, tolerated, but never fully included anymore. Still, I continued to cook for everyone. I folded the laundry and carried it upstairs. I sang lullabies to my granddaughter at night. I helped her put on pajamas and brushed her curls before bed. At the park, I pushed the child on the swing, helped her climb the slide, carried her toy basket back to the car. When they came home, my son would hug me, say thank you, but his tone was light, protective, as if he knew our closeness was fading and had nothing to say to stop it. At dinner, I'd ask my daughter-in-law how her day was going. She would glance over and say something polite but distant. No warmth, no interest. Once I overheard her on the phone describing me as interfering. She said, "It's like she constantly wants to be included in everything, even if we don't need her to be." Another time she remarked, "I love her, really I do, but sometimes I just want a mom and dad's space. It can't be grandma and parents all the time." I felt a pang. They had once welcomed me with hugs and tears. Now they wanted gentleness born of distance. I wondered if they labeled me a helpmate when they needed me, and a surplus when I stopped surprising them. I recall one evening, I decided to fix a loose cabinet hinge I had noticed earlier. I lifted the tools from the garage and climbed onto my knees to tighten it. My daughter-in-law stepped into the room and saw me half bent in the cabinet. She stiffened and looked away. "I told you not to worry about that," she said coolly. "We've got a handyman scheduled for next week." I watched as she walked away, but I did not get up. I completed the task and closed the cabinet with care. That night, I stood in the light of the living room while they watched a show. My granddaughter asked for a second story. I placed my hand gently on the TV remote and said softly, "I'll get it in a minute." My daughter-in-law glared. "Don't touch anything," she hissed. I froze. My granddaughter's eyes welled up again. I moved aside, saying quietly, "All right." After they left the room, I sat alone on the couch. The silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It felt like a wall, built around me, but forgetting I was ever part of the foundation. I kept doing my duties, cooking, cleaning, caregiving. Even as my place in the home shrank, I realized then that respecting boundaries for them meant pushing me out, and I realized I'd forgotten one thing. Boundaries are two-way streets. One day, I pet the car as I left for preschool pickup. The Camry still ran fine, humming with memories of laughter and early morning trips. The daughters-in-law's words echoed in my mind. Just a babysitter, old tech. It did not hurt. Not then. It made me think. And in that calm spinning I understood. I was giving them everything. Now I was giving myself something back. Tomorrow I would start. I would teach them what respect really means. Because you cannot lose your voice in someone else's house without remembering just how loud silence can become. The dinner that night felt different from the start. The sky outside was a deep indigo, and the kitchen light glowed soft and warm, just like every other evening I had shared with them. Yet, beneath those familiar comforts, something had shifted. I prepared the meal in silence, measuring not only ingredients, but also my hope that tonight would be different. Soft jazz played on the kitchen radio. The baby giggled from the other room. Everything looked normal. He sat at the head of the table, as he always did. She sat across from me, and my granddaughter next to me, fidgeting in her chair. The Camry, freshly washed and parked in the driveway, hummed gently in my heart. I had still hoped it represented unity. I began serving the casserole I had baked that afternoon. Chicken, rice, vegetables, all bubbling in creamy sauce. I placed a plate in front of them, silverware polished, napkins folded with care. I set the baby's high chair and smiled as she reached for her food. "Thank you, Mom," my son said. His voice was low and calm, like a child who stepped between parents on the edge of an argument. I smiled back, but felt the tension make the air heavy. At first, the meal passed quietly. She made comments. "It's good. Everyone's eating." But her tone lacked the warmth I remembered. I noticed her eyes flicker when I reached for the gravy boat, and her jaw tighten when I brushed her granddaughter's hair. Halfway through the meal, I asked about the new routine for preschool, and she replied tersely, "We will let you know." Her words hit me like a winter gust in summer. No warmth, no thanks, just obligation. I took a breath and held my own. I thought of all the nights I was up with scraped knees, the afternoons I sat through teacher conferences, the mornings I woke early to make sure the car was ready. And suddenly I knew no meal could hold the grief of all that was unspoken. When I reached for the casserole dish again, trying to serve my son, she slammed her hand on the table. That sound cut through everything. "Stop," she said loudly. "Stop it right now." Her eyes were cold. Her hand shook just enough to reveal anger. "You are not in charge here," she continued, voice growing louder. "You don't run this house." I set down the dish. My heart pounded louder than the dinner bell on my family's farm back in the day. The baby's crying rose behind me as though something had fractured. My son opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then she pointed at me, shaking. "Get out," she screamed, voice cracking with emotion. "Get out now, or I will call the cops." That sentence cut deeper than a knife. The color drained from my face as I stared at her hand trembling in the air. On the counter, the casserole bubbled, as though mocking the tension that had erupted over it. My granddaughter started to cry. My son looked away. I felt everything collapse. Shock came first. My mind raced. Months of caregiving, handfuls of sacrifices, heavy hours, all overlooked, all erased by those 4 words. Then came sadness, deep, aching sadness, because it wasn't just me. They had stripped my place in their life, my presence at their table. But beneath that sadness, something else took root. Resolve. I slowly stood, letting my chair slide back against the floor. My hands were steady now, though tears wet my cheeks. I held the dish for a moment, then placed it gently on the burner. I looked at her across the table, feeling her rage head-on, yet unmoved. "You have every right," I said softly, my voice low but clear, "to ask me to leave." Her mouth opened, But no more words came. I stepped away from the table. I gathered plates and silverware with quiet determination. I washed them at the sink, ignoring the tremors in my hands. I placed them in the dishwasher, closed the door, and stood with my back to the room. Then I spoke, softly enough that only my son could have heard. "Tonight was the last time," I said, turning from the sink. "This ends tonight." I did not stay for goodbyes. I walked to the front hall, collected my purse and keys. I walked out into the night air, head held high. I heard the garage door hum behind me as she turned it off. She wanted space, and I was giving it. Outside, the driveway was empty. The Camry's reflective surface caught the moonlight. It felt like a beacon of what had been shared and what needed to end. I touched the side mirror. One final goodbye to a chapter of my life, loved, given, and then discarded. Then I walked away, quietly, with my hands full of dignity. I whispered into the night, "Tomorrow starts something new," because tonight was the end of what they called family and the beginning of what I call freedom. That night, I did not sleep. The house was silent except for the low hum of the fridge and the tick of the clock on the wall. But inside me, everything was loud. Months of unspoken disregard played in my mind like a broken record. Her words still echoed, "Get out or I'll call the cops." I touched the stack of keys in my purse and felt their weight. The Camry belonged to me, even though they treated it like theirs. I moved quietly through the dark house, gathering what I needed. My doctor's prescription papers tucked in a folder, a spare set of clothes folded with care, and the important documents, registration papers showing my name, not theirs. That car was mine, always had been. They only used it because I said they could. My hands shook slightly, but I kept going. I packed a small handbag, enough for a few days. I thought of the early morning hours ahead, before the sun, when the world was still soft and forgiving. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want arguments. I just needed to take back the one thing that symbolized their entitlement and remind them that I had a right to choose too. By first light, I slipped into the Camry. The seat still smelled faintly of lavender and baby wipes. I held the wheel. I breathed in deep. This was not theft, not revenge. It was reclamation. I drove to the public garage nearby, where I had parked the car months ago. I stepped out and slipped the key into the lock. The engine started on the first turn, humming under me like a faithful friend. I paused, half expecting a knock at the door or a shout behind me, but the lot remained empty. Morning, slow and quiet. Next, I called the towing service I had once used to pick up a broken-down lawnmower. "I need to have a vehicle towed," I said calmly. "It's parked at my home address." I gave them the coordinates and waited with polite patience. Then I drove home one last time. The driveway was empty. The garage door stood like a promise waiting to be broken. I watched as the tow truck pulled up, the driver lifting the Camry onto the bed. I walked past them, steady, as if I owned the moment. Because I did. Once the car was secure, I slipped inside and placed a small note on the driver's seat. Written in neat block letters, it read, "You asked for space. I cleared the spot. Enjoy your room." I didn't say more. The message didn't need explanation. The driver rumbled forward, the car disappearing from view. I stood in the driveway, alone but not lost. The garage behind me was empty, clean, open, and exactly what she said she wanted. Space. I closed the garage door with a firm push. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't linger. Instead, I turned and left that house, the house that used me, silenced me, and threw me out. I walked away quietly, carrying just enough, because I had already taken back what mattered. Tomorrow, the car would be gone. Tomorrow, I would be ready for what comes next. And tonight I slept, not because I was tired, but because for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I had taken back what was mine, and that was enough. I drove that Camry straight to the local women's shelter on the outskirts of town, the sun slanting low through the windows as if spotlighting my purpose. Inside, a soft murmur of conversation and the faint laughter of children greeted me as I pulled up. I parked at the curb, already feeling my heart swell. The shelter director, Mrs. Ramirez, greeted me with warm surprise as I stepped out of the car. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "This is a big gift." I nodded. "It helped me once," I said, "and it's time to pass it on." I handed her the keys and paperwork. She beamed, explaining how a single mother named Julia had just started a new job and needed transportation desperately. I watched her hug Julia in tears. heard the little girl gasp with joy. That moment filled the car and me with something I had almost forgotten: purpose. Driving away, the air felt cleaner, my shoulders lighter. I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I felt like I was giving everything to someone who truly needed it. That night I slept soundly, truly soundly, for the first time in weeks. But morning brought a knock on my door. It was Mr. Jenkins from next door, looking uneasy. "Ma'am," he said, "I hate to bother you, but I thought you should know." His voice trailed as I ushered him in. Heels. "He went into your garage last night," he said. "Your daughter-in-law, she was messing with your car." I blinked. My stomach tightened. She what? He showed me his Ring camera footage, grainy but clear. A woman, her hair, her build, it was definitely her, kneeling by the rear wheel of the Camry, faffing near the brake line. Sparks, frantic hands. He took me to the shared driveway, where a flattened bolt, a bent cable, a patch of oil-soaked grass bore witness. "I heard a noise around midnight," he said. "Couple days ago I thought it was an animal, but this is deliberate." I felt the familiar rush of shock and sadness. Anger followed swiftly, then purpose again. I dialed the sheriff. By noon, deputies arrived, questioning neighbors, checking cameras, confirming tireless details. When she was identified, they came to arrest my daughter-in-law. I watched from a distance. She didn't resist but looked stunned and furious. A mother turned criminal in a moment of rage. At the station, she was booked for vandalism, tampering with a vehicle, property damage, endangerment. They found her fingerprints, and Mr. Jenkins's footage sealed it. Later, there was a small headline in the local paper: "Neighbor arrested after late-night vandalism in quiet cul-de-sac." They didn't mention the family ties or the babysitter-turned-caregiver, just the facts. Word got around fast. My son confronted her, tears and horror. "You've ruined it," he said. "We could have fixed the brakes, but you crossed a line." I sat quietly in my new apartment when I got a text from him. "Are you okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine." He asked if I would press charges. I said I didn't want to make things worse. She wasn't the first to be angry with me, but what she did, that could have hurt someone, not just us. I chose to speak with the deputies to give a statement, not to press charges, but to protect the women's shelter donation and to hold her accountable. Sometimes accountability doesn't come with triumph, it comes with boundary. That night I made a cup of hot tea, looking out my window at flickering streetlights. I wasn't celebratory, I was wise. I knew wounds don't heal overnight, and that redemption isn't guaranteed. But I also knew I had taken them out of chaos and into clarity. I had gifted kindness and reclaimed peace. And this twist, as hard as it was, showed me they would never learn respect by silence alone. I closed my eyes, breathing in the hume of the city. The Camry was gone. The act of violence had cleansed more than one conscience, and while the path ahead held grief and healing, I was finally walking in a place of truth. Because taking back what is ours is just the first step. Holding space for what we deserve, that's the journey. That morning, the calm of my new apartment was shattered by a knock on the door. It was my son standing there, pale and hollow-eyed, as if someone had draped heartbreak over him like a winter coat. Behind him, headlights from parked sheriff cars still cast harsh shadows along the walkway. He didn't need to speak names. I saw it all in his face. His wife's arrest, the judgment, the viral headline, and most devastating of all, the knowledge that the car, their family's vehicle, now belonged to someone else. He came inside slowly, hands in pockets. He looked around at my modest little space, the strip of floral wallpaper, the chipped coffee cup I'd bought at a thrift sale, a quilt folded neatly on the bed. He sat in the chair by the window, hands clasped tight. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, voice cracking. She shouldn't have done that. God, I never thought. He paused, shook his head. I saw the report. They're asking for divorce papers. His voice was small, defeated. She says she can't live with the shame. She's leaving. She's taking the baby with her. My heart clenched, but I braced myself. I had rebuilt myself, brick by brick. I could handle this too. Do you hate me? He asked suddenly, meeting my gaze for the first time in what felt like forever. Do you blame me? I closed my eyes. My answer was simple, but true. I don't hate you, I said gently. I don't blame you, but I can't stand by and watch you or her hurt me anymore. Not then, not now. He nodded, tears fresh on his cheeks, as though he were swallowing regrets meant to last a lifetime. That afternoon, my son and daughter-in-law returned the keys to the Camry, not to me, but to the shelter director. They left boxes on the doorstep, baby clothes in plastic bins, torn-up toys, photographs from when the car was new, showing laughter and possibility. And then the door closed behind them. They moved away later that week. The for rent sign flashed in the yard they once filled with life. I didn't go back. It was not mine anymore, and neither were the memories packed in cardboard. My son called once. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, voice ragged. "I should have heard you. I should have stopped her. I should have protected the gift you gave us." I answered, "No. Hadn't you done it, I'd still be in that garage, being called a babysitter, being threatened with police." He was quiet. Then he said, "I wanted to give you a home. I didn't realize I was taking one away. I thought of the love I felt building that family, all the sacrifices made. But some things, once broken, cannot be mended with apologies. I hope you find your peace," I said softly, "because I'm finding mine." That was the end of it. I did not respond to messages asking if I would press charges. I did not attend any court proceedings. I did not call them back again. I chose silence, not out of spite, but because sometimes silence is the clearest statement. The weeks that followed were still. No boxes arrived, no "Mom, can I come over" calls, and I was okay with that. In the hush that settled, I discovered clarity. I planted a little garden on my balcony, small herb pots, bright marigold blooms. I hosted book club meetings in my living room. I started volunteering at the library, helping children learn to read. I reclaimed the rhythm of my own days. The car, our last tie to their version of the past, was gone, not just physically, but emotionally. And that's when I realized what I gained: space to breathe, space to be seen, space that wasn't shared because I was expected to give up my voice. My son may still be grieving what we lost. His wife's mistake forced consequences beyond both of us. But I know this: in letting go, I no longer carry guilt nor obligation. I only carry memories I made freely, and love I gave willingly. I do not miss them. Instead, I miss her words echoing through that night: "Get out or I'll call the cops," and I know I earned the right to walk away. Their departure was not the end of my story. It was my beginning. And as I water my little herb garden each morning, I whisper to myself, "You are enough. You deserve peace, and you earned this life without apology." For the first time in months, my mornings felt endless, not in loneliness, but in quiet possibility. I live now in a small apartment above a corner cafe in town. My kitchen table is set by a broad window that fills the room with morning light. Each day, I brew a pot of loose-leaf Earl Grey. The kettles whistle a gentle awakening. I pour the tea into my favorite porcelain mug, the one chipped at the rim but irreplaceable, and I sit across from the window, watching the world come alive below. The first morning was the sweetest. No rushing footsteps, no slammed doors, no expectations of where I should be or what I should do. I tucked a quilt my husband made around my shoulders and took a slow sip. The flavor, bergamot, steam, earth, hit me like home, home that belonged only to me now. For breakfast, I made a simple spread: 2 scrambled eggs, a slice of whole grain toast, a bowl of fresh berries from the farmer's market. I set it all on the small table, arranged it with care, and sat down. There was no one to judge the butter I used or the way I paused between bites, no one to whisper that I was taking too long, eating too much, or breathing too freely. It was all mine. I ate with the same reverence I once reserved only for family gatherings, those crowded, chaotic affairs where my place felt smaller by the year. But today, every bite tasted like freedom. It was a life that didn't demand apologies for being rested or desires for a moment's peace. It was a life that didn't require me to shrink so that someone else could grow. Late morning, I stepped onto the small balcony, tending to my herb pots, basil, mint, and a single marigold that glowed like a tiny sun. I watered each plant gently, whispering encouragements to them as though I were speaking to my own heart. Here, I am still nurturing life, still practicing care, but in a space that does not demand I disappear. At noon, I walked to the cafe downstairs and ordered a tuna sandwich and iced tea, not rushed, not hurried. The barista called me ma'am, not gentlewoman or busy mom, just ma'am. I smiled. I felt seen and unseen in the way only anonymity can be a grace, like I belonged and could vanish, all at once. On the walk home, I passed the street where my son and daughter-in-law once lived. I paused at the corner, where their garage door stood silent, the driveway empty. No sign lingered of the family I once fanned into flame. But I felt no longing, only release. I returned home, pulled my framed certificate from college off the wall, and placed it on the small desk I keep by the window. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, a reminder that I earned respect and knowledge, not just affection. I insisted on it once. Now it stands quietly, without apology. That afternoon I called a friend and invited her for tea. We sat in my cozy living room, sunlight dancing on the quilt. We talked about books, rainy days, grandchildren's antics, not about my son's family or my daughter-in-law's words. Just us, two women who knew what it meant to hold on, to give and to release. When she left, I stood by the door and said, "Thank you, this means everything." And I meant it. That night I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and looked in the mirror. The reflection staring back was not the woman who waited by the phone or tiptoed around expectations. It was the same woman who once believed in love so deeply she built family with her own hands. Only now, she had built a home within her heart. I smiled gently at her reflection. "You wanted space," I whispered to the glass. "Well, I gave you space. And now, this space belongs to me." I breathed in softly. I breathed out freely. Yes, I may have lost them, but I have not lost myself. I still have my values. I still have my voice. And I still know worth. Because sometimes the greatest gift we give others is the gift we give ourselves. Freedom to live, unbounded, unashamed, unafraid. It is final and beautiful. And I will hold it forever. If this story touched a place in your heart, if you've ever sat in silence after being called too much, or not enough, know you're not alone. We may be quiet, but we remember. And sometimes our greatest strength is found not in shouting, but in walking away with our dignity intact. Because when they say we're a burden, we show them we've been the foundation all along. If you'd like to hear more true stories from women who've endured, remembered, and finally spoken, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. This porch has many tales, and each one is a reminder. Revenge has no expiration date. Wisdom doesn't shout, it whispers. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens. Click subscribe and stay a while. There's always room at this table for truth.